Hi folks, Robert Lowell Goller here. Thank you for joining me for our weekly chats about local history. How many of you recognize one of these? You'll see them on the sides of streets in small towns like East Aurora, many towns actually, and they're called carriage stones or mounting blocks or horse blocks. And when we do walking tours with the children from the schools and things, they're fascinated by these. And not surprisingly, a lot of people, a lot of students, a lot of kids understand what it is right away. It has something to do with horses. Now, I'm at the corner of Oakwood Avenue and Walnut Street, and there's not only one here at the side of the road, but there's one one behind me along with some hitching posts. And the reason I'm talking about this today is I got a question recently about these carriage stones. And what you would do, it was simple. A carriage in the 1800s would pull up and you would have trouble. The height of the carriage would be so high that you wouldn't be able to get into it without some help. And so the stone would literally be a step to get into the carriage. Pretty simple. And these stones would be on main streets as well as some side streets, and they were quite common. And they came in a variety of sizes and shapes, and actually they were considered a status symbol in many places. In New York City along Fifth Avenue, you would have had some really elaborate ones. Buffalo, Delaware Avenue, the mansions would have had some really elaborate stepping stones, many multiple stones, and it would actually be considered a status symbol. And in many cases, there would be either the initials of the people who lived who it belonged to, or actually the name to give it some status. The people would have a status symbol right in front of their house. Now, there are a lot of these around. But be careful when we talk about these, and don't associate them necessarily with the house that they are in front of. Probably a vast majority of these that you see today are not originally in their original locations, and they're not necessarily connected to the home they're out in front of. This one being a perfect example. Mr. Godfrey, who lived here, collected a lot of historical things, including a lot of artifacts that are now in our museums here in East Aurora, and the stepping stones being one of them. There's actually a stepping stone outside of the Millard Fillmore house on Shear Avenue, and it's not in its original location. This one probably isn't. The ones behind me on this property are probably not in their original location. Even though this house would have probably been old enough to have had carriages come up to it, these stones are not probably originally located here. I actually had someone call me recently about a carriage stone, excuse me, sitting outside a house in Amherst. And I did a little research, Google mapped and Google Street Viewed it, and discovered that the house that it sat in front of, or sits in front of, was built as part of a housing development after World War II. And of course, by then, these would have been obsolete. And it had turned out that we believe that carriage stone was placed in front of a modern house by an owner at one point, just as a decoration, and wasn't really originally associated with that property. And so be careful when you see hitching posts and things and carriage stones that you don't associate necessarily with the house. Don't get so wrapped up in that of trying to figure out who lived in the house and whether this was their stone. In some places that is true, they are in their original locations. There are actually some quite famous ones in cities where they've preserved around the stones. Some places even have them fenced off as like historic relics, but very rare in a small town like ours for that to happen. Most of them, as Main Street was developed and they put in new roads, they would have been obsolete and taken away. And some people like Mr. Godfrey would have preserved them. So that's why you'll see some out in front of homes, but again, not in their original location. So it doesn't mean that because they're not in their original location that they're not important to history. It's actually a reminder of how we lived back in the day when carriages would pull up. And also remember that not everyone had these stones, so they would have to get up into carriages without them. Some people had like little step stools to get into their carriages. But along Main Street, you would have seen these in front of a lot of businesses as the carriages pulled up, wagons pulled up in order for people to get into them, especially women in their long dresses. Imagine how tough it would have been to get into the carriages. So these are great historical relics that you'll often see occasionally on the sides of roads, but they're a great way to remember how we lived in the 1800s, how human beings lived in the 1800s, but they aren't, many of them are not in their original locations, and the house that they sit in front of, it's not necessarily connected, so just remember that. But they're really cool to look at, and they do tell us a lot about our history. So I took the show on the road this week at the corner of Oakwood and Walnut, but you can visit carriage stones like this throughout the community, not just East Aurora. They're in many communities, and they're really neat, a neat reminder of our history. Again, I'm Robert Lowell Goller. I am the Town and Village Historian, but these videos and a lot of my research are not officially connected to my duties as Town and Village Historian. And as always, thank you for keeping history alive. If you have a historical idea, a topic for a video, please put it in the comments or send me a private message. And as always, these videos are also available on my YouTube channel at Robert Lowell Goller. Again, thank you for joining me. Thank you for keeping history alive, and we'll see you next time.